I'm Yulia Shahnazarova, and we are now in Yerevan, Armenia.
Okay, and what's today's date?
Oh, today's date is the 20th of January, 2024. Wow, 2024 already.
Yeah. So maybe you could tell a bit of your background. How did your parents end up in Baku?
My great-parents originate from Artsakh. So from my mother's side, my family is from Shushi, and from dad's side, from Hadrut. And I was born in Baku in 1984 in a household that had already been existing with 3 generations of Armenians in an international, multicultural and multinational environment.
But how did they end up in Baku? If they were born?
So when the waves of the genocide of 1915 reached Baku, and before that my great-grandparents were already settled there, it was around 1918 that they left Baku, and they were in exile along the river Volga for quite a long time, and my grandfather was already born in exile in Astrakhan. And when, after the waves of genocide, eventually my great-grandmother, again decided to resettle in Baku, and she came back, and they continued their coexistence, and they started to build up everything from the scratch up there. So, as I said, this household experienced the massacres of 3 generations of Armenians. Consequently, my parents were already born there, and I was born there.
But what were your parents and grandparents doing in Azerbaijan? How did they were living? Where did they live? In which district? And what language did they speak? And
right. Well, Artsakh has a very beautiful dialect. Probably you have heard about it. I'm sure you've heard about it. And Russian. So there were 2 languages that were spoken in our household. And the occupation, as for the occupation of my great-grandparents, the Meliks who came from Shushi, at that time they were involved in the oil industry, so my great-grandfather was involved in that area. And then already my mother's I would say, I don't know how to differentiate. So, my grandmother from the mother's side, and so my grandfather from mom's side, they were both professors at Baku State University. My grandmother was teaching English, and my grandfather was teaching German. So they were linguists by education, and their occupation was, their mission was teaching. And they had high status in Baku. They were very respected. They had high reputation, and actually there were many nationalities who were living under the same roof. So it was the Soviet Republic of Azerbaijan, I should say, where Russians, Jews, and many other nationalities and Armenians coexisted and co-created all together. So at that time, probably during the Soviet years, the conflict was not so acute.
But you went to kindergarten there?
Actually, when the massacres in Baku started, I was only 5 years old, so I didn't even manage to go to kindergarten. And I didn't receive any formal education in Baku, just from my grandfather. I remember him quite well. He was one of my closest friends, and I loved spending time with him. So I got all of the non-formal education from him. Unfortunately, my grandmother passed away very early, and I didn't have a chance to spend more time with her, but I spent lots of time with my grandfather, who was my best friend. I still remember him, Yulia Shahnazarova. So actually, he changed the last name. Our original last name, family name, is Melik Shahnazarians. And in the Soviet times, the surnames were unfortunately changed. I even was thinking about restoring it, because I have all of the documents and all of the written records of my great-parents. But then I don't remember what was happening that I didn't go for it, but eventually I could, because it's all documented.
You will still have this opportunity. You can keep this option open.
Exactly, yes.
But were you living in the district of Armenians in Baku, do you remember, or like in some other district?
We were living in the center of Baku, so there was the boulevard, and there was, I think, the square, the central square, and our house was, I believe it was next to the building of the government. It was in the center of Baku, and that household experienced many great occasions of many friends who were visiting my parents' place, my grandparents' place. There were many celebrations, again, as I said, Azerbaijanis, Jews, Russians, so, and since my grandfather was quite famous at those times, both at the university level and at the city and the country level, so he had a huge network, and my grandmother was a very hospitable woman, so there were many guests, and I remember many great stories that my mother was telling about the gatherings under that household, the ceiling of that household. So it was quite peaceful, it was quite friendly, I would say. And unfortunately, until we got to the atrocities that started to happen in 1989, there were many good acts of kindness and care that we experienced while neighboring with Azerbaijanis, because probably it all started with a political agenda, because at the human level there were many good examples where people could coexist and find a common ground. But I believe that can be attributed to the Soviet regime.
But do you remember also Baku, like the streets and what smells or something?
I have some memories, but I wouldn't say those are that vivid. I remember some of the walks and the strolls that we had when I was a kid along the Caspian Sea, the boulevard, and then there was, I think there was, I don't know, a platform from where there were some divers who were going down and jumping down, and it was, I think it was a famous place, and we were passing across that place many times. So, but I don't have fundamental, like, rooted memories with anyone except my family. So whatever I remember about the pogroms that started in 1989, I would say it started in 1988, because my uncle was living in Sumgait, and it all started from Sumgait, the massacre, and the ethnic cleansing of Armenia started from Sumgait. And I clearly remember my mother was telling how my uncles, I have two uncles, fortunately they were safe, they survived, and when they appeared at the doorstep of our household, just knocked at the door, and they had basically a very small purse, or I don't know how to call it, and 2 toothbrushes. I clearly remember my mama telling that, and with horror in the eyes, and it was absolutely paralyzing, but they were able to survive, which was close to impossible, because the agenda, the national agenda, was to exterminate all Armenians who were living in Sumgait at that time. And then the waves of the massive cleansing and the genocide reached Baku, and it all started in 1989. And my mom was also working and teaching at the university. She was an English teacher. Actually, our generation, our household has a generation of teachers. So.
Are you also a teacher?
I'm by occupation. I have a couple of occupations, and one of them, yes, I think it's a mission. I think it's something that I'm passionate about, and I can't live without it. So eventually, when in 1989, I was 5 years old, and I loved spending time, as I said, with my grandfather. And we were at home on that unfortunate day when my mom, who was supposed to come back from home at a certain hour, she was late, and not only late, but she was like very late. It was 2 hours past the time that she was supposed to be at home. And I remember we had a neighbor, an Azerbaijani lady. She came to our apartment and said that the pogroms have started. So she communicated that in a way that there is violence happening in the streets, there are people persecuted, and it's all scaling up. And then she said, well, I'm not sure if I will be back or not. And I remember those words. And I think that was my first traumatic experience that I remember from my childhood. And it accompanied me during the further years until the recent past. Unfortunately, I was able to overcome it, but the words and the feeling and the sensation and the terror that my mom would not be back, I would lose my mom, this was one of the traumatizing experiences for sure. And I was looking at my grandfather, who was already taken sick. He had some health issues, and I was looking at him, and I was expecting to see hope and reassurance in his eyes, but I was not getting what I was expecting to as a kid, and I realized that something awful is happening. Well, I was a kid, I didn't have that conscious understanding of what was happening, but I had an intuitive feeling that something is very, very wrong. Fortunately, my mom was back on that day, and afterwards it was simply impossible to go into the streets of Baku because there was, as I said, it was already a government-sanctioned massacre that started, and Armenians were targeted with the purpose of no Armenian to be left alive. And it included acts of violence against women, against children, so it was practically impossible to leave home, and you can imagine it's impossible to live in a place where you are not even allowed to go out to get some groceries or get some bread, or it's at the surface, at the fundamental level, it's about danger to your existence. So the saddest part started when, unfortunately, there was no way to prevent this, and it was already in full scale. It was impossible to remain there, and the massive exile of Armenians from Baku started. We left, I believe it was around New Year, and one of the memories, again, when we were talking with Mom about this, I remember a story, which is a true story, and I think many people who were witnesses of these events can testify. Azerbaijanis were drawing crosses on the doors of Armenians from blood, and when the cross was being drawn, it meant that the following day that household would be exterminated. So we couldn't believe, and we didn't want to believe that this was happening to us, but when that red bloody cross appeared on our doorstep, that was the last sign. It was a gracious act, maybe, of letting people know that they have to flee, there is no other chance. And my grandfather, he actually couldn't believe that this was happening, because he was always saying, I'm sure the Soviets will protect us, I'm sure we will never be forced to leave. But that happened, and when my mother, myself, and my grandfather were about to step out of our apartment, my grandfather went into stupor. He couldn't move. He practically couldn't move. I don't know. That is awful, actually, because the person dedicated his whole life to a noble cause. He was a veteran of the World War II. He served people all his life. He helped many people. My grandmother always said that he would rather take it from family and give to no matter friends or relatives or whoever, including Azerbaijanis. And then when at the very vital moment there was no one around, but his friends were trying to help. His Azerbaijani friends were trying to help, but unfortunately it was not possible, because they would be taken to prison. They would be in jail if the government or someone knew that they helped Armenian. So by miracle we survived.
Do you remember how did you live?
Yeah. we left everything behind. It was not possible to take anything. So just fortunately, for which I'm very thankful to my mom, and I don't know how she managed to do that, but she took the family album where the whole generation and the history was, and which is currently at our place. I'm very thankful for that. Some financial, some money, and I don't know if there was something that we could just grab and leave. So basically we went to the airport, and it was, I remember that it was very hectic. I remember some, everyone was chaotic. It was fearful. I remember the fear those years. If I'm remembering about those years, the first thing that comes to my emotional state is the fear, and despair and the frustration. My grandfather and my mom who was trying to save us. And unfortunately, there were many acts of violence that were happening those days. My uncle was telling about the story of an Armenian family that were living in a household with a big library. There were many books in the library, and when the pogrom started and the Azerbaijanis intruded into the house, they just laughed at whatever these people had built over the years and centuries, and said that you Armenians, you have no history. And then they put the library, the whole library, including the Armenian heritage books, on fire. They burned it all. So, yeah, that is tragic.
But how did you arrive to, like, where did you go from Baku?
We arrived in Yerevan. My mom's choice was to come to Armenia, closer to the motherland. Our relatives, many of our relatives left to the United States, mostly to the United States and Russia. And again, I'm grateful to my mom for her choice of coming closer to our historical motherland. And so we started to settle everything up in Armenia, in Yerevan. And you know, the 1990s, those were the hardest years in our history of Armenia. So it was blockade, there was no light, there was no electricity, there was no gas, and having lost and leaving everything behind and coming to Armenia, where again there was this economic crisis, and not only economic crisis but a social crisis, because you can imagine a large influx of refugees coming from Azerbaijan. So just to put into numbers, 300,000 Armenians who fled from Azerbaijan during the massacres coming to Armenia. Well, I wouldn't say all of the Armenians came, but the majority came, and in an economic blockade, in circumstances of economic blockade with such a huge influx of refugees, so the country obviously was not prepared for that. So we went through lots of hardships, from hardships related to physical existence, of getting an apartment where to live in, and getting food, getting clothes, which was it's not like these nowadays that everything is available and you can actually access whatever you need. But those times was very tough. So my mom's choice again was to go for citizenship of Armenia, to become a citizen of Armenia. And well, definitely when you become a citizen of Armenia, it means that you do not receive any foreign assistance, you do not receive support, etc., etc. There was some support in the beginning, I believe, in the first months after our arrival. I think it was some food, I think it was some basic clothing, but again, it was very different from what was happening these years, let's say, starting for 2020. I will talk about it later. Yeah. It was very hard.
But do you remember this arrival to Armenia? For example, where did you stay or where did you go?
We stayed, I don't know how to call that in English. Well, unfortunately, a lady of immoral behavior, I will put it that way, she was renting a space for refugees. And as a kid, I was staying in that place because there was no other way for for us to get another place in the beginning, and we were staying at David's place, and it was shared among many Armenians who were at that time refugees. Yeah.
In what sense, immoral?
Like a prostitute. Well,
sounds like a literature.
Yeah, and I am still amazed at my mother's strength on how she did everything to get me out of those horrible conditions into a decent living place. So we rented an apartment in the beginning. Then over time, my mom started to teach at school. Then at the university, we were able to get an apartment. We moved out of that horrible place. We started our more or less decent existence. And during those years, I think the hardest part that I clearly remember is going to school and not knowing Armenian. The Armenian who everyone was speaking in Armenia. And no one was, well, I would say some of my classmates knew Russian, but I remember I was bullied in the beginning. I was bullied because I was different and because I didn't speak the language. And you know, people in Armenia at that time, even, I don't think they knew much about the destinies of those who survived from Baku. And I think people didn't even have a clear realization that everyone in Baku, Armenian Bakus, are rooted in Artsakh. And this direct correlation, I mean, until we started to communicate and until we started sharing and until I learned the language, I think it took around 3 years that I adapted to the new reality at school, and then starting from the 5th grade, I would say I don't remember I think the traumatic experience started when I was already in the 5th grade. So I don't know. It's like it took from 3 to 5 years to adapt to the new reality.
But I think this bullying is also very common in the situations where people are living also struggling to live. So
right.
Probably it was also that those kids in the 90s here were
right.
also traumatized, maybe.
Many kids, many children. I think it was just due to lack of awareness because people didn't know. But when they started to get our family better and when we started to talk about things that were happening, there were so many kind and caring people who were worried about our destiny, who did a lot, that supported us a lot. And I would say the whole nation, during those years, it was a tough period, psychological trauma, because on the one hand it was a flourishing area because we won the war over Artsakh and Armenia got its independence. But on the other hand, there were so many social and economic hardships that couldn't but be reflected in the psychological behavior of people and the mindset of people.
But for example, when you identify yourself, who do you consider yourself? Armenian or Armenian from Baku or Armenian from Karabakh? Or what's your identity?
Armenian from Artsakh, although I didn't live in Artsakh. But when I'm thinking about my identity, it's Armenian and Artsakh Armenian.
Okay.
And as long as Armenians are alive, Artsakh will be alive. And that's what I strongly feel about.
And it seems to me also that this Artsakh Armenian identity is something completely separate from, I don't know, Armenian from...
Eventually, I would love the identity of Armenians to be kind of more unified, because eventually we all are Armenians. It doesn't matter from Artsakh, from Gyumri, from Tamush, from Shirak, from Tamush, from Sunni. But it was just because our history evolved in a way that we experienced exile, that we experienced the hardships, that we experienced just because you're Armenian, you're being persecuted. So that's what kind of unites all of the Armenians who fled from Baku, and before that fled from the waves of the Armenian genocide, and from Shushi, from Hadrut, from Artsakh. that's what unites. All of us. And I think, yeah, our nation has gone through lots of hardships. Well, when I'm thinking about it, I still would love to have more illuminated and more positive national vision. Not to be living in the past, but having a vision of being stronger for the future. But there's one important thing that I have always strongly felt about. If we do not remember about our history, and if we are silent about everything that happened with us, we don't know about it, we don't talk about it, silence breeds silence. We don't talk about it on a wider scale and the world doesn't know about it, then the history will repeat itself again and again and again. It's a vicious circle. That's actually, yeah, something that I very, very strongly feel about.
But, that's also one of the questions that I keep asking myself. Is there any way to keep our past with us, but at the same time have some kind of positive future vision? Some kind of, is there anything like this possible to, like, not to forget about our past and at the same time look into the future? Or what would be this positive program for us?
Unfortunately, let me start for now, thinking about the history repeating itself in 2018 and then 2020 and the most recent tragic events and whatever happened to Artsakh. And now I do not see a possibility for a peaceful coexistence of two nations. That's what I strongly feel about. It's not possible. Especially when I'm looking. So my stepsisters, I have two stepsisters. They fled from Artsakh a couple of months ago, and you know that Artsakh was again in blockade for 10 months. People didn't have anything to eat. There were huge lines for bread. There was no light. The internet was being cut off. So after the so-called peaceful agreement, there was nothing peaceful there. So again, that agenda, that political agenda, national extermination of Armenians, it continued. And then when it was the last days, when it was again practically impossible to stay in Artsakh, my stepsisters, together with their families, they left Stepanakert. They were living in Stepanakert. And I remember we lost connection with them for 2 days. We weren't able to connect over the phone, over the internet. There was no connection at all because the whole road that was leading from Artsakh to Azerbaijan, to Armenia, it was paralyzed. The cars were taking some tiny steps to move forward. And the phones were cut off, everything was cut off. Then there was a tragical event in Stepanakert, the explosion at the gas station. And the worst thoughts came to my mind and our mind, because when we lost connection with our relatives, we started thinking that something terrible had happened, and maybe they were part of that gas explosion episode. And we started looking for their last names in the lists that were being shared, who is in hospital, who is dead, etc., etc. So you can imagine all of the turmoil and the emotional burnout and that we were going through. And on the third day, we were able to restore connection. They called and said that they are alive, and then there was, oh my gosh, and then they arrived. Then they arrived to Armenia. Absolutely, well, they didn't have a chance to eat for 3 days. So I don't know. It's worth talking about it because it seems very easy. Well, there is no Artsakh formally, although I do believe that it exists. People have left. They are settling up again, and people from Artsakh especially, they have huge, strong will, determination to live and create. That's undeniable. I haven't met any single person who is not like a phoenix reviving from ashes. But we cannot forget about it. We cannot close eyes on it. eventually I believe there might be some, I don't know, magical day that justice will be restored. The only thing that we can do now probably is just focusing on the human values, on the values of care for each other, on the values of becoming stronger, learning, education. I think education is key. Being closer rooted to our identity, knowing our history, having our strong national identity, having a positive vision, where we are going as a nation, what do we want to achieve as a nation, what is our agenda, what's on our agenda. So it cannot solely be limited to recognition of the Armenian genocide and the loss of our motherland for now. So there should be something bigger. So I do believe that we should be investing in our education, and I would say that should be happening not only for Armenians, but that should also be happening in Azerbaijan. But I don't know why there is such huge propaganda of hatred, and from what I see from different media channels and from what I hear, it's all about this hatred propaganda, and no human value can be based on hatred. Human values and people should be should be united by higher values of love, care, and strength, growth.
But for example, what do you think if this Aliyev dictatorship would end? Could there be some coexistence, or there is too big damage is done between those nations?
Well, first of all of those damages and losses, not sure that those have been properly documented. Though, if they have, then there should be some how to say claiming for those losses. So it should be somehow returned. I'm sure that the moral losses and the psychological trauma cannot be cured. Because until now I will be 40 this year, but I remember all of the traumatic experiences that I went through as a child and the consequences of those. So fortunately and luckily, I was strong enough to, as I said, learn, grow, and become self-sufficient. But what about the kids now who, again, are left with nothing? There should be some social justice, there should be some economic justice, some political. I'm not talking about political justice, but at least the retribution. So whatever needs to belong to the person who has lost something. I'm not talking even about the moral aspect, but the houses, the property. There should be some kind of a justice. I'm not a politician. I'm very far from that. I don't know how that's happening, but I would love for the international community to be probably more involved and more committed to restoring that sort of justice. Because at a human level, I don't know how would you expect a peaceful coexistence of someone who just tore your whole library ablaze, or just took the what you have created for years, and you have invested your energy, love, and time into those. Those are material things, but those reflect your soul. This is not just the material things. This is your soul. So I wouldn't expect that to happen now, at least until some sort of justice is restored. And again, I say I would invest in the development of the human values on both sides. I'm not talking about a peace agenda now. Again, I don't think that is possible until the justice is not restored.
But how does it look to you? Did Armenia this time reacted somehow differently to refugees? So was it different from?
People in Armenia were so self-organized. You cannot imagine. When you were walking, it started with 2020. If you walked around the streets of Yerevan, you would see support groups, youth who were organizing packages of food, clothing, first aid, supplies, everything for people who were refugees from Artsakh. And I would attribute 80% of all of the support that went in those days to the ordinary people who were just so much concerned about about their compatriots, about their friends, and even the strangers who didn't know each other were so much caring. So that was a huge transformation. If I compare to what was happening in 1990s and what was happening in 2020, you cannot believe it is a huge transformation. And there was no one who would be just indifferent and not engaged in any initiative. It was a totally self-organized social initiative that the people were part of, and many my friends and relatives from Artsakh who just came in here, they were they said that they were so touched and could find no word, didn't find any word, just words of gratitude. That was the least that we could do at that time. But yeah.
Did I get it right that you came here with your mother and grandfather?
So my parents are divorced, so my father actually also, he helped us when we were just moving out of our apartment from Baku. Again, everyone was risking their lives because it was not allowed to go out of the household at that time because you could be killed or you could be raped or you could be, I don't know, anything could have happened. So I believe that God was with us, that we didn't die those days and we were able to survive. So my father, we restored our relationships when I was already a bit older, and now we are united, especially given that my sisters, my stepsisters, are now here. And there is one touching episode, I think I want to share that. They were living in a big household, 3-storied household in the center of Stepanakert. They had a guest house. Very creative people. They were, my sisters worked in the Ministry of Social Affairs in Artsakh. Her husband was engaged in maintaining the guest house. So you can imagine everything that they have created throughout all of these years. So again, in 1 second, after coming up from the bombings in the shelter where they were at, they just had, I don't know, minutes to grab the first things, necessary things, and just go into the car and come over. And when they came to Yerevan, of course, the first shock passed with and they have kids, so they have 3 kids, 3 boys. And the 4th was born in November. So they came over here, and in these 3 months, they were able to build up an apartment. They were able to, I don't know, they did everything with their hands. When I'm saying that Artsakh people are very, very, they are creators. They are not waiting for anyone to come and do something for them. They are creators. That's in the blood. Of course, we supported as much as we could. My family supported as much as we could when they were just here, and then they invited us to their place. And my sister's husband cooked a very, very tasty dish, and then we were sitting at the table, you know, after the New Year already, and looking at all of those traumatic experiences and that particular moment. And that particular moment should be cherished, and it's something that I will never forget. How a person, well, I went through that myself, so I'm not very much surprised, but when you deep dive into that, that's amazing how a person is able to restore all of the inner energy into for the future, because either you are stuck in the past or you move towards the future. Unfortunately, they lost hope that they will any day be able to go back to Stepanakert. So one of my sisters still hopes to, but the other no. I don't know. That is that's something that I always find. I don't have words actually to talk about that. That's something beyond us. It's beyond us.
Maybe we also need time to find words about it, to speak about it, because it's just so raw at the moment.
You know, in 2020 there was still hope, because you know, when we lost Hadrut, when we lost Shushi, and I lost 2 motherlands at the same time. But part of Artsakh was still there. And many Artsakh people who came in 2020 to Armenia, the first chance that they had to go back, even into that risky environment, although there were Russian peacekeepers, but again, they took that opportunity to go back home. They had an opportunity, for example, they could have stayed here, but everyone wanted to go back home because you're where your roots are, and you're just attracted, and you go back. So at that time there was this hope, but now it's a little bit different. I think we should rethink and transform our approaches, because obviously it's not working the way that it used to. There needs to be some new paradigm.
But what could be this new paradigm? Okay, I also understand that it just happened. Maybe we still need to figure it out.
Yeah, I think we need to figure out what that should be. I don't have an answer for that. The only thing that I can say is that we have to become stronger. It is our responsibility to become stronger. It is unacceptable for us to give up, especially now.
I have one last question. Is there anything that you would tell to non-Armenian listener or reader of this story? What could be this final thought for someone who's not Armenian? Like a message.
Again, going back to my family story and what is happening these days, Armenians are very strong people. I don't remember a single occasion when, well, we can complain, but when it comes to preserving our national identity, when it comes to creating something new, big and beautiful, the Armenians have an ability and inner resource, irrespective of all of the tragical events, to restore themselves and just go forward. And I'm proud to be an Armenian. I'm proud of my mother's choice of coming to our historical motherland in those days, because I could have been in another place. I don't know how my fate and destiny would be. Probably I would have a different pathway of development than I have had now. But I do believe that we should just keep strong to our roots, not forget history. Again, I would say keeping silent would breed silence, and then no one would know. But then my hope is that the more people know about these tragic events, the less possibility of them to happen again. And then maybe one day we can break that vicious circle. Because that is injustice. There's not a single child who should be raised in conditions of psychological danger, because that is a direct precursor to personality issues, to integration issues, to social integration issues. So your growth is stopped as an individual, and we don't have the right to stop our growth. We have to go forward. I would call for really. I'm sure many people are engaged in many initiatives, and I know there is a person, Anastasia, I really admire the work that she's doing, and she's closely engaged. She's a lawyer, and she's done so many benevolent acts throughout her life, and she is doing that. I'm sure many people are engaged, and she's an embodiment of calling the justice, speaking at every tribune that is a possibility to spread the word and raise awareness of people. It is sad for me as an Armenian that across the world we do not have that much awareness raised. What has been happening and what is still happening in our country.
Thank you.